It's such a special program, and it's going to be a really intergenerational program and a moment of connection across history. So with that, I want to turn the mic over to Kellyanne Nakayama, who will be speaking more about the program and welcoming you from JANM.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Japanese American National Museum. We are very much grateful for your presence and participation today, and also like to give a special thanks to the Greater Los Angeles Area Council, Boy Scouts of America for your partnership in planning and promoting this event. I'd also like to acknowledge a few special guests that we have in the audience. We have our trustee, Mike Okabayashi, here with his father. Thank you, Mike. And I think we are also expecting former LA County Superior Court Judge Judge Lance Ito. Oh, there you are, thank you. And I believe you're also an Eagle Scout, is that true?
No, that's one of the saddest parts of my life.
But you're still a Scout, and I know you're a big supporter of Scouting. Thank you for joining us. I also am I'm so excited that we have a great turnout from local Scouting communities, not in numeric order, but I believe we have Troop 1, 379, 290, 633, 509, 738, and 719 in the house. Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the board members from the Greater Los Angeles Area Council that are here joining us today. We have John Johnson, the board chair. Thank you. Tom Hartman, Ross Arnold, and Mike Burkholm. Thank you so much for supporting us. So JANM was founded 30 years ago by the Japanese American community to share our history and experiences, including the unjust incarceration of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. And the museum is also nationally recognized as a center of excellence. We're an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institute and recipient of the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences National Medal, which is the highest national honor in this field. And we were recently hailed as one of America's treasures by the Ford Foundation for its commitment in promoting our nation's rich cultural and ethnic diversity. And we say here at JANM, we shine the light of history to inform the present and to shape a more just future. And we do this by telling powerful stories that demonstrate history's relevancy and urgency so that we never forget. And we see this not just as a Japanese American story, but this is an American story. Because whether or not you are Japanese American, this is a story that relates to all of our families. It's a story of our parents, our grandparents, many of whom are all immigrants themselves. And these stories matter because they help shape our perspective and values and belief systems. So as Joy mentioned, this program is presented as the opening for the new exhibition, Don't Fence Me In, Coming of Age in America's Concentration Camps. This exhibition explores the experiences of Japanese American youth who asserted their place as young Americans confronting the injustice of being imprisoned in concentration camps during World War II, while also embarking on the universal journey into adolescence. And it's an especially personal exhibition, and today's program and exhibition are especially personal to me. So my grandfather was incarcerated during the war, and he was my age when World War II broke out, and he was incarcerated at Santa Anita Racetrack. And like me, he had a young family whose kids were also in their adolescence. I'm also a Scout mom and a volunteer and have two sons in Scouting who you'll hear from today. Kenji is a Life Scout and Seiji is a Tenderfoot rank. And it's just difficult for me to imagine what our lives would be like if we were uprooted from our home and our community, much like what these guys have done. And then for Kenji and Seiji, who are the same age as these presenters are when they were incarcerated in camp. So it's a great exhibition, and like Joy, I encourage you to take advantage of your admission to the museum today and visit this exhibition. There's also an audio tour available. There'll be a QR code that you can scan, and it'll take you to the Bloomberg Connect app, where you can hear Emily Anderson, our curator of the exhibit, and stories from 25 incarcerees who share their experiences and memories from the concentration camps. So from joining scout troops to sports, social dancing to music, patriotism, and life after camp, we can discover how these Americans of Japanese ancestry use their resilience and creativity to forge friendships and community in the face of abrupt upheaval to their youth. And now I'd like to introduce Tom Hartman, and our Eagle Scout. He is not only an Eagle Scout himself, he's a council board member for the Greater Los Angeles Area Council, a regional volunteer for the BSA National Council, co-chair of the Eagle Scout Alumni Committee. But most importantly to me, he's my son's merit badge counselor and a dear personal friend. Thank you, Tom.
I didn't know she was going to tell you all that about me. I'd like to thank the museum for asking us to join in this event today. One of the things we try to do as an Eagle Scout Association is to bring back Eagle Scouts to contact with the council. So thank you all who have attended today. I'd like to second Kelly's words about going to the exhibit. I was fortunate a few minutes ago to go through myself, basically alone. It's very powerful. So thank you for inviting us, and thank you, Eagle Scouts, for joining us today.
You're going to get to hear from some of those very Boy Scouts, as well as some who were not there that day. But before we do, I just wanted to make a note of, you all saw former Secretary of Transportation Norm Mineta there, who, despite being a former U.S. cabinet member, when told by Bacon to do something, you can tell everybody does. If Bacon tells you to do something, you hop to it. But if for those, this is it's actually a pretty well-known story, but in case you have not heard the story, I thought it was worth repeating here. When Norm Mineta was taken from San Jose as a boy into Heart Mountain, he wore his Cub Scout uniform on that day, and and you'll see him sharing the story. We interviewed him there at Heart Mountain, and he talks about how on the train he also had his bat, his baseball bat, his treasured baseball bat, that an MP took away from him because it was considered a weapon from a Cub Scout, an American Cub Scout. And he never got over that. But once he was in Heart Mountain, which I believe at the time had the largest Boy Scout council in all of Wyoming, there were 7 troops. One day there was a camporee with a troop from Cody, Wyoming, which is the closest it's between Powell and Cody, but a troop from Cody came in. And so because the Japanese American kids couldn't really go out, so a white Boy Scout troop came in, and the Japanese American kids and the white kids got paired up together, and Norm Mineta got paired up with a kid from Cody named Al Simpson. So they shared a tent. And if you look it up on YouTube, because it's worth watching these two tell the story themselves, this is but a poor reproduction of it. But essentially, they decided there's some kid in another tent that they didn't like, so they channeled water down the hill to flood the other tent. And even 60 years later, they're very proud of themselves. It's one of the funniest things to see these 2 elder statesmen get twinkles in their eyes as they remember being 12 and flooding somebody else's tent. And that relationship that was forged because of Boy Scouts and within camp became the basis of one of the most sort of profound friendships in U.S. government. Norm, as you know, went on to be mayor of San Jose and then became a congressman. Meantime, Al Simpson became a senator from Wyoming. So they had stayed in touch, but they reconnected in Washington, D.C. And when they were working on getting a redress bill through Congress, Al Simpson was one of the people who made it a bipartisan bill because he was a conservative Republican from Wyoming, but he had spent a night in that camp. So he could be a witness and say, these people were not disloyal. These were American kids, I know, because I was there. And so he co-sponsored the redress bill. And And they're such a fun pair to see because Al Simpson, even as an old man, is like 6'5". He's the most, and he likes to make sort of a dramatic appearance. So he's and then Norm, as Norm got smaller, it seemed like Al got bigger. But they were they were always those little 12-year-old boys when they get together. And so they were the emeritus chairs of the Heart Mountain Foundation, and they're now creating the Minetta Simpson Institute in Wyoming. And all of that, it all goes back to that chance encounter in a pup tent in a Boy Scout camporee in Cody, Wyoming, in Heart Mountain. So, Norm was, he was a Boy Scout, so he was part of this because being part of the flag raising was more important than having him be up on the VIP seating section. So now, with no further ado, I want to introduce you to our feature. So we're going to have an intergenerational conversation now between our older Boy Scouts and some younger Boy Scouts. So I'm going to start over here with Dr. Takashi Hoshizaki of Heart Mountain Troop 313, a scout leader. He graduated from Heart Mountain High School, and he was Bacon Sakatani's scout leader. He was also a Heart Mountain draft resistor who was imprisoned in federal prison for 2 years, but he was pardoned by Truman, and he later served in the U.S. Army in the Korean War. We have Mike Hachimonji. What's your troop number?
345.
345. Okay, so we've got 345 representing. Mike Hachimonji, his brother Ike, they're twins, but they were not in the same troop because they were not those kinds of twins. We have Frank Murakami and George Iseri representing Wapato, Washington, and Troop 323 of Wapato. And then we've got Dick Cushino there, and then, of course, Bacon Sakatani of Troop 313, and formerly of El Monte. So the others that you saw up there were Nori Uyematsu, Raymond Uno, and Shigyabu, also of Heart Mountain. And then our younger scouts here are Seiji and Kenji Guinto. They are, Seiji is 12 and in 6th grade at Laguna Road Elementary School in Fullerton. He joined Cub Scouts as a kindergartner, and his mom, Kellyanne, was his Cub Scout pack leader. He just earned his tenderfoot. Kenji is 15, and he's a sophomore at Troy High School. He joined Cub Scouts and is currently a Life Scout, working on his Eagle rank. Kenji and Seiji are half Japanese and half Filipino, and they have relatives who were incarcerated at Santa Anita in Manzanar. So, Seiji and Kenji, I pass it over to you. Good luck.
How does it feel to see that film and relive that moment together?
He's asking, how did it feel to relive that moment at Heart Mountain with your friends?
I hated it. I was really struggling, and I didn't notice Yuka there. It was really a scary moment for me because I didn't think I was going to finish cranking that thing up. And I think we finished after, the crowd was singing the national anthem, I think. Yeah. But they couldn't see the flag going up because they were under a tent.
Let me interject here because I was a witness. You actually got it to reach right to the top, right as Aaron Aoyama, who was singing the national anthem, finished. It was the most perfect timing. It looked deliberate, Bacon. So.
Could I just comment? Makes a great comedy piece.
Okay, I just want to make a comment. I was sitting, as you know, close by watching Bacon cranking that thing, and as he went up and down, I thought, wow, how's that going to come about? Well, thankfully that we had people come in the system, and while the flag finally was going up,
And Bacon was cranking, as he mentioned. He says, I didn't know the way he was going to make it at all. So thank you, Bacon, for doing such a great job.
So I know that most of you guys were in middle school to high school age, and some of you were even graduating high school. What were like the changes that you had to go through for daily life, and how did that change feel?
Rephrase your question.
So we want to know how life changed for you between before the war and then going to camp. So what changed about your life once you went to camp? What do you remember?
Well,
How do you feel?
Imagine it's a huge change. We were living a normal life with our friends and so forth, and moving around as well as, just like anyone else. But then here, all of a sudden we're now in confinement, and although we weren't strictly guarded and all that stuff, we were limited to some extent in our activities.
So what kind of stuff did you guys do during your free time in camp? Like, I know outside of camp there's like baseball fields that you guys can play, but like in camp, what kind of stuff could you do?
Sorry to interrupt, but can I actually, going back to that first question, I'm so sorry, guys, but we got two people. So Frank and George were from the Yakima Valley in Washington. So you guys came from a different place. How did life change for you? Because you came from you came from Washington and you came to Heart Mountain, and there were all these California people there. What was that like?
May I answer the part of the first question too? About the flag raising? Yes. The bugler was missing. I was a bugler. I raised and lowered the flag, and the bugler was missing. Being from Washington and pulling out from regular life, it was a complete change, because none of the kids you grew up with are there. Everybody is new. So it was a complete change and a shock. And joining an organization like the Scouts, that helped, because that gave some organization. And the Drum and Bugle Corps that I belonged to, because I was a trumpet player, that gave something. That gave us a lot of things to do to draw us together. I would not know Mike if it wasn't for the Drum and Bugle Corps and things like that. Thank you.
Could I add to that? Before the war, I was a member of the Troop 33 out of St. Mary's Church, and we got to the stage where we were making preparations. Now that was 1941. We were making preparations to spend a week at Catalina Island, and that was the big thing that we were all working for. And unfortunately, the war broke out, and so that just completely canceled that trip altogether. And as I said, the big change was that here we had something planned, and with the evacuation, that was completely gone. But then the powers that be at Heart Mountain did try very hard to give different activities that would be similar to what we were trying to do before the war.
So how was school different in camp than outside? Because I know it's like a much smaller area. Like, how was it different?
Well, I started my first 3 years in high school in Heart Mountain, and so I have no anything about prior to evacuation. But our first semester was in the barracks, and there's no, you're trying to talk or trying to listen, and right in the next room, they're doing the same thing. There's so much noise that we had a difficult time learning. And then we had wooden benches and rather crude things. But by the next semester, a brand new high school had been built. I don't recall. Some people say the Iseri, the WWII built it, but I think it was an outside contractor because the construction was too good. No, I don't. I'm not trying to take away from the evacuees. It's just an outside contractor, all the equipment and everything. Oh, gee. But it was an excellent high school. It had big rooms. We had a gymnasium with a wooden floor. Lots of classrooms. And I would think that it would have been the envy of other schools around the state of Wyoming. I want to mention something else. I was asked, or what troop I was in. I was in 345, and I'll tell you a little bit of story about that. I was recruited by one fellow by the name of Hoshizaki Murakami. And Hoshizaki is a name that got, in the Nisei way of doing things, they shortened his name to Shark. And he didn't exactly ask me to join 345. He kind of told me I'm going to join 345. And Shark Murakami was not the kind of fellow that he said no to.
To add to what Mike has to say about the first year of school, they were in regular barracks, and our seating was picnic benches, a picnic table with the seats built in, if you know what those are, and there was a stove in the corner, and it burned coal or wood, and if you didn't fuel them correctly, they would belch. And you know what a belch is? One day, one in our classroom belched, and it blew ashes all over the room, and we evacuated, and we had to stand outside until everything got cleared up so we could go back to class. But that's what a belch is.
So, scouting must have definitely been different. How did you guys work on some of the like merit badges and skill sets that you needed to go through for scouting?
Gosh, I don't remember. I do know that I managed to make, like you did, Life Scout. One thing that made me not go for Eagle was because bird study. Bird study was a merit badge, and if I recall, we didn't have any birds around there. Yabo had a magpie, but I don't know how he got that one. Anyway, I don't recall seeing any birds around there.
One of the requirements for Eagle was swimming, merit badge, and we had a homemade swimming pool in camp, but the brother to the lady that sat behind me, Nakamura, passed away from what he caught in the swimming pool, and the pool was drained immediately, and that stopped all swimming.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have our most decorated Boy Scout who somehow was sitting up higher. So I wanted to take just a sort of interrupt and take a second to introduce Bill Shishima, a longtime JANM volunteer, and also one of the, this exhibit was volunteer initiated, and he was the chief suspect behind all this. So Bill, this is a result of your efforts. So thank you. And now, it occurs to me that it might be helpful, because I've actually interviewed everybody but Dick here, but I think it might be helpful if you can each say, starting with Bill, say how old you were when you entered camp and how old you are now. So Bill, how old were you when you went to camp?
I was 11 years old. Now I'm 92.
Okay. Can you repeat that to Dick so he can hear you?
Could you let us know how old you were when you were? Could you let us know how old you were when you entered camp, and then how old you are now?
I was 11 when I entered camp in '42, and I'm now just a few days shy of my 92nd birthday.
I guess I entered camp when I was 16 years old, and today I am 97 years old.
I was 12 years old, and I'm 93 today.
I was 14, and I'm 95 now.
George?
I was born in January 31, 1928, so I'm 95 years old now.
I was 12 years old, and I am 93 years old now.
So, thank you. So yeah, they were all just about the same age as you guys are now. So, give it another 80 years and this is where you'll be. Okay, go ahead, boys. Go ahead, go back to the questions.
So, how scouting is based on so many outdoor activities. How were you able to go camping and hiking and some of those types of activities?
Okay, in camp, I believe we were the most hiking and camping troop at Heart Mountain. We had 7 troops, and we competed for district flag. So it depends on how much advancement you have in the troop, and then how much hiking and camping. So of the 4-time awards, Troop 333 won it 3 times because of the camping.
I remember at one time during the winter, we were permitted to go outside of the camp, and there was snow on the ground, and so we, the troop then, had hiked out away from camp, and it was kind of interesting to see in the snow, as I pointed out to the scouts, the different markings that the different animals had left in the snow. In addition to that, later on in the spring, they had set up a large tent outside of the camp, and we did have an overnight there. Those are the only 2 activities that I remember, because I left quite early in the camp.
Bacon, you told me a story about going fishing on the Shoshone River. Can you tell everybody how you got out to do that?
Well, one day, we Boy Scouts decided to go camping at the river. Okay, so we went to the mess hall and begged for wieners and loaves of bread. Okay, so that was gonna, serve all of our meals, wieners and bread. Okay, so we went down to the river. Oh, we did not have our scout leader. just the boys, 15 or 20 boys went down to the river.
Wait, how did you get it? But the river's not in camp. How did you get to the river, Bacon?
We were allowed to go outside the camp. Within the huge camp acreage of thousands and thousands of acres, we were allowed to stay within that. And then there was this river. Okay, so a group of us Boy Scouts went down to the river. Okay, next to the river was a watermelon patch. Okay, you know, the camp farm had this large watermelon patch. But no one knew how to pick a ripe watermelon. And one of the boys had a pocket knife. And so he started to plug, you know, cut a little chunk out of the watermelon to see if it's ripe or not. You know, if it's green, well, we just put the plug back in. And so the boy, you know, I was just following him. So the boy was cutting a lot of watermelon. Now, I don't remember if we found a ripe one or not. Anyway, we got back to the camp, and we only had blankets with us. You know, it was real hot, but it looked like there was going to be a summer rainstorm. And so our parents got worried at the camp, and so they came after us. And so we had to pack up and leave, you know, go back to the camp. Well, the camp had a camp bulletin, a newsletter that went out, you know, every couple of days. So a few days later, the camp bulletin came on, and the lead headline said, "Camp watermelon crop destroyed by vandals." You know, we just cut a few watermelons to see if they were ripe or not. But boy, you know, I read that bulletin and I turned white. And my sister was next to me, and she grabbed the bulletin and she read it. And she said, "Was that you guys?" Well, anyway, boy, I was really scared for the next few days, but we were never caught. But I would like to mention another event that we Boy Scouts did. You know, we were 10,000 of us in 1 square mile. You know, there's people all over, so we formed gangs. You know, my group of 10 years old, 11, 12, 13 years old, we had a gang of, you know, like 15 people. And so we were roaming around the camp, and some young kid on the tail end, he got pushed around and he went home crying. Well, the next day, the police came after us, and they took us to the police station. And oh boy, did we get a lecture. The police chief really bawled us out, you know. But luckily, he did not tell our parents. So we really got away with that one. But let me tell you a story here that all of us could chip in on. In 1944, you know, the young people or young adults who could find jobs on the outside could leave the camp. And so many young Niseis who just graduated high school or graduated from college, or, you know, young adults in the 40 or 50 were leaving the camp. And so now, left in the camp were young people, you know, school kids, and our older immigrant parents. And so now the camp director was worried that the youngster in the camp were being influenced by the immigrant parents with their Japanese ideas. And so the camp director wanted to have the young people have the American way of life. This is all written in this camp report to the camp director. And so the camp director got in touch with the head of the Yellowstone National Park, which was nearby. And so he got approval that 500 Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts from Heart Mountain to be able to spend 1 week at Yellowstone. And so I was on the first group of 100 Boy Scouts to go to Yellowstone. We saw, you know, Old Faithful, you know, Yellowstone National Canyon, all the geysers and, you know, the hot pools. Oh, it was really a thrilling 1 week journey to see that Yellowstone National Park. And with that, maybe some of you can expand on what you did at the Yellowstone National Park.
You know, in the first two instances that Bagan talked about the watermelon and so on, I'm innocent. But Yellowstone was a really exciting opportunity, and one thing we did was we built a bridge. I'm not quite sure what kind or where, but we built some bridge so that the park rangers could go from one place to another without having to go around. So we in a sense, paid our way into the park.
Yeah, we collected unused poles. I don't know what they were for, but they were throughout the area. We had to recover the poles and bring them to the site where the bridge was being built. So we were coolies carrying poles across the area. The bridge, I understand, is still there, but it's in a restricted area and you can't get to it, but it's still working.
When the Japanese build something, it lasts.
Well, okay, let me expand on that bridge. Okay, the second group of Boy Scouts who went to Yellowstone were asked to build a bridge. There was a lot of telephone poles left over. And so with the telephone poles, the Boy Scouts built a bridge, okay, and the succeeding group. So several groups finished putting up a log bridge at Yellowstone. And then in the year 2002, a small group, about a dozen, you know, Bill Shishima was there, right? In 2002, about a dozen of the Boy Scouts who put up that log bridge went back to Yellowstone and found that bridge still intact. And we have photos to, you know, to prove that. Okay, who else went to that Yellowstone?
Did you go to Yellowstone? No. Do you remember anything about a bridge? A bridge at Yellowstone? Do you remember anything about the bridge?
We went to Yellowstone, and I think it was 1944 or something like that. And what we did was build a bridge over a small creek.
That's
so that
First Creek.
Park rangers could cross over the stream without getting wet. You know, it used to be a barrier for them. They would have to go around it, find a narrow space to go around it, and this saved them a lot of time, and they really appreciated it. But that was a very simple project for us, and we enjoyed being in the park without a lot of other people, and being able to see all the natural phenomena that the park offers. Yellowstone has a lot of fissures in the ground, and they emitted smoke and water, hot water, and other gaseous things, you know, that would make the area very unique. And we really got a chance to to study it and see it. And I think that was really a highlight of my one of my camp days. Yeah.
Okay, George.
The name of the creek was Nez Perce Creek.
Oh.
The name of they say it's still standing there, but the name of it is Nez Perce Creek. We built the bridge over.
Okay, let me tell you one person who was not able to make that trip to Yellowstone. Sometime in 1943, the drafting of young people into the U.S. Army started. Tak Hoshizaki was a recent high school graduate. Okay, so when the Army started to call people to report for their physical, Tak Hoshizaki refused to report. You know, he refused the Army order. Okay, so the Army people came and picked him up. Okay, and so there were 62 others who refused to report. And so 63 people, you know, his age, were put on trial in the biggest mass trial in Wyoming history. You know, these people refused to report for the Army physical. And the 63 people were convicted and sent to prison. Oh, what a, you know, big disgrace for us Boy Scouts. An assistant scoutmaster, you know, refusing order from the United States Army, goes on trial, you know, gets convicted and sent to prison.
So,
you know, it was really a big disgrace. You know, a Boy Scout, a Scoutmaster, being sent to prison.
So Bacon, let's have talk. Can you share? So this is actually a really important part of this group and a real treat for us because Tak Hoshizaki is, I believe, our last surviving Heart Mountain draft resistor, I think. So could you share a little bit about your draft resist? Because this is part of the Boy Scout story of Heart Mountain, is of your draft resisting and your imprisonment.
Yeah, well, very quickly, one of the things was that we stood for trying to get back our civil rights, which was taken away when we were put into the camp, and plus the fact that we were trying, with the trial, we were hoping to get a large publicity so that the rest of the country could then find out what had happened to us. But then, in the end, President Truman pardoned all of the draft resistors, and then about 10 years later, I got my second draft notice, and then ended up serving in the Army as a medic. And so someone said, well, you did double duty. And I said, what? And she said, well, you did 2 years in the federal penitentiary, and you did 2 years in the Army as a medic. So anyway, out of that group, there were 6 of us that were still young enough to be drafted a second time. That was just out of the Heart Mountain group. And I'm still trying to find out what had happened to those in the other camps. There are a total of about 300 of us that refused to go. I'm sorry that we ran off to the side here.
No, this is really great because, you know, I mean, this is one of the most important stories, and that we get to include. We can talk about the draft resistance as part of the Boy Scout story. So even though you were disgraced as a Boy Scout leader, and also Bacon apparently gets lost on mountains, so you didn't teach him well enough to keep him from getting lost. I've heard this story also. But yeah, so Tak Hoshizaki spent 2 years in federal prison for standing up for his civil rights. But you also learned the piano and calculus, right? In prison? In prison, you took a math course, and he has the most sort of nirvana approach to his federal imprisonment.
Oh, one of the things I learned in prison was that great mix of people, so that I suddenly realized what was happening to the black community, and then also from some of the other groups. And so it was actually a good learning experience for me. With that, I have a great sympathy for many of the people, and then especially when you learn I guess you might call the problems that many of the people have, and when you consider all of that, you get a completely different perspective of that particular person's life.
I think it should be mentioned that Tack really suffered, during the camp days. He was looked upon as a traitor, a big disgrace for doing what he did. That was the thinking of those days. And it was many, many years later that the majority of the Japanese Americans realized that, what Tack did and what he stood for was the right thing.
Also want to mention that Tack served in the Korean War.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so when your family was out of camp and when they were not violating your civil rights, you said, okay, of course I'll serve in the Army, right? Yeah. So draft resistor and veteran of foreign wars.
Do you still remember the Scout Oath and Law?
I'm sorry.
Hey, I know.
Do you still remember the Scout Oath and Law?
My hearing is bad.
Scout Oath and Law.
Oh, okay.
I got it here.
Are we ready?
Okay.
Scout Oath.
Okay.
You say,
Did you,
Let me finish that.
can't think of it in the middle here, but
Put your mic up.
okay, here we go. Okay, I will do on my honor. I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country. And at the time, we now realize that the country was completely wrong. And so, in a way that that's where many of the resistors were trying to point out. And it took many, many years before the people began to realize what had really happened. And today, the fact that we were put into the camp was considered the worst case in the history of the United States, perpetrated upon a minority group.
I think we're all going to do the oath together at the end. We're going to invite the other Boy Scouts up to do that. So I think there was a second part of this question, too.
did you ever find it challenging to uphold or follow the Scout Oath and Law while incarcerated, especially as your loyalty as an American was challenged?
I was at age 14. I really didn't get involved in these issues. It's more like I'm just doing my thing, going to school, playing around and so forth, and political issues was far from my mind.
Yeah, I think that the question is, as you mentioned, kind of, Tak, that the Scout Oath and Law were so meaningful, right, and had these words, but potentially were a bit, that it was kind of contradictory, right? So I was wondering if, and you all were pretty young, as you mentioned, just going to school, but is there any kind of feelings that you can remember from that time of the experience of finding it challenging, to upload the Oath and Law with this kind of question of patriotism?
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to what I guess the resistors felt, that the country was not doing the right thing. And so if we look at the Scout Oath, he says, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country. And at that time, I think the country needed a little fixing up. And so I guess that's where I decided that I wouldn't serve until we were trying now to at least bring about some correction.
What about, oh, go ahead, Baker. So for those of you who were too young to be drafted, how did you feel about that?
Okay, Tack was a little older, and he had different issues. Okay, we who were, like from 12 to 16 years of age, we didn't have that kind of problem. Our problem was what kind of activity were we going to do today? The Boy Scout oath was good for Friday night. That's when we held our meeting. Okay, that's when we behaved. But all the other time, there were too many other things to do.
Like chasing girls.
When you have 10,000 people in 1 square mile, and you have boys my age all over the place, then, fooling around after school was the main thing. This Boy Scout, for me, it was Friday night. Okay? But other time, we were just fooling around just like any other white kids on the outside. The war was the adult thing. For us kids, that was not our problem. Our problem was, what are we going to do today?
Recognizing the fact that our parents, the Iseis and the older Niseis, lost a lot, homes, property, occupations, what have you. But for teenagers like us in early teens, in the words of one of our scouts by the name of Tom Hide, he said, we were kids, we were having fun. And that's true. We, as kids, we're chasing girls. I discovered girls. They're different. But that, you have to think as the teenage mind, not the mature adult mind. I'd like to plug for 379. Anybody from 379 in here?
We got 379.
Oh yeah, good for you. Before the war, they had a drum and bugle corps. It was well known in L.A. And when 379 wound up in Heart Mountain, they had all the instruments brought in, and they reformed the drum and bugle corps, and made it available. Any scout in any troop could join the drum and bugle corps. And let's see, Frank was the bugler. I was the bugler. My brother beat the bass drum. Tom Hede was the drummer.
I was on the bugle. I was on the bugle.
You too? Okay.
And George?
And
George's brother Dick was also on the bugle, right?
What?
Dick Iseri was also bugler.
Oh.
Yeah, to raise the flag.
Who's that?
Jake O'Hara.
Oh, Jake O'Hara, yeah.
And my brother Dick used to blow the bugle.
I think Tosh O'Hara too. Anyway, I'd like to give credit to 379 for making the drum and bugle corps available to all of us.
I was also in the drum and bugle corps, and we would then be part of the various different programs. And I remember, I think it was probably Christmas or so, it was very cold, and we were out there, standing out there in the cold, and then when it came time for us to play, Frank probably remembers, being a bugler, the group then put the bugle up to our lips, and boy, was that mouthpiece cold. And when we tried to make a sound, just a sputtering sound came out. It's kind of embarrassing. So then so finally we learned to take our mouthpiece off and keep the mouthpiece in our pocket to keep it warm. So when it came time to do our part, then we assembled the mouthpiece back on, and so we didn't have much more problems after that one. But that first event, kind of embarrassing and made horrible sounds with the bugle.
I would imagine that's not something you have to think about when you're from Southern California or someplace warmer. We are kind of, I know we could talk forever, but I want to move into, if we have maybe a couple audience questions, I'll bring a mic around. But I was wondering if maybe as I grab a mic from one of you all and bring it into the audience, if maybe you all could talk a little bit about like why Boy Scouts, and I would love to hear from like folks like Bill, who's wearing your uniform today, why it's still so important to you and what it meant for you while you're in camp. And then I would also love to hear from you two, Seiji and Kenji, kind of if you could share with them about why you're a scout, why it's important to you and what it means to you to be, wearing that uniform. Or maybe what a difference being a Boy Scout meant in camp, like what it kind of provided for you during that time. Is that something any of you? And also I'll get an audience question if anyone wants to raise their hand.
Bill, why was Boy Scouts such an important part of your camp experience?
Well, when war broke out, I was 11 years old, and I thought leaving the West Coast, I won't be able to be a Boy Scout, because at that time you had to be 12 years old. And I was looking forward to it because my older brother was in the scouting program, and I just couldn't wait to be a Boy Scout. But behold, in Heart Mountain, we had 7 Boy Scout troops. So had my chance to join the Boy Scouts, and then that gave me friends throughout the camp, younger and older. The Boy Scout also had a basketball program and a football program. So we competed against each other throughout the camp. And the Boy Scout ranged in age from 12 to 18, so we had 2 leagues of basketball and 2 leagues of football, so we could compete against each other. So Boy Scout really, really saved our life and kept us out of trouble.
And Bill, in the basketball, Bill came in first in the basketball league. I came in second.
By the way, first thing I met Bacon after camp, that was the first thing he brought up, that I outscored him in basketball.
What about, oh, go ahead.
Bill, we have a question from your friend Hal in the audience. He wants to know, can you tell us about the Silver Beaver Award that you're wearing around your neck?
It's an award given by the local Los Angeles area council for volunteers. So it's a volunteer thank you medal. And I put in a few hours volunteering and helping the community.
Before we move into our audience question, did anyone else want to talk about kind of the meaningfulness of Boy Scouts?
So Frank or Mike or George or Dick, any of you, what did Boy Scouts mean to you? Why did you join, besides Shark Murakami? What was meaningful about Boy Scouts in camp? Yeah, either of you, any of you. Frank, go ahead.
The scouting program made an influence on me. After I left camp, I went to high school, and went into the service and came out to Los Angeles. I was spotted downtown LA by Rocky Shimatsu, one of our drum and bugle corps members. He spotted me, invited me to the little church, and he started a scout troop in our church. And after a year, they talked me into taking over the troop. So Noel Tsuneshi and I had the troop for almost 8 years. Then Jack Masumoto from, I think, 379 came and took over. And now it's Ted Sakamoto, who was one of my Sunday school students when he was in junior high. He's been taken it over after that, and it's still in existence today. So that's the influence Scouting had on me to take a troop and make it grow, and it's still operating. So that was my take from that. Thank you.
I think we have an audience question over here, so.
Well, first I want to thank you folks for coming out and talking about your Boy Scout career. Mr. Shishima, thank you for being the Scoutmaster of 379, and you gentlemen for honoring 379 for offering to do the Drum and Bugle Corps. I was also part of 379, I was a Scoutmaster at one time. But my question is, I heard that we have multiple troops in the camps. What was the division? Why 7 different troops? Why not just one big one? Was it based upon the barracks or where you came from?
So, can I just step in and? So a lot of the troops were they're the continuation or it was transfer. So for instance, 379 transferred their affiliation to Wyoming so that there was no break in their existence. And then some of these other troops, like 323 was all Wapata, Washington kids. 345 and 333 were the branches of St. Mary's and Maryknoll from Los Angeles. There was also a troop that was mostly San Jose kids. And then 313 was formed independently in camp, apparently partly through Shark Murakami, who is, I've actually referenced Shark Murakami in a text panel. So now you know the origins of Shark Murakami. But and that's true. And if you look at all the camps, I actually have a spreadsheet where I tracked. So there is, any troop in a camp that has 79 is kids who were in 379 who are now. So there was like a 179 in Amachi. There's also Troop 64 in Amachi that was a centenary troop. So all of those basically either they existed beforehand in some form and the kids continued on, or sometimes because it's 10,000 people, so they would divide it by region, so by block, so that you would be with the kids that you live near. So sorry, I took over, but that's the historian researcher in me. I spent a lot of time to put that spreadsheet together, so I'm glad I can share that information.
We have one more audience question down here.
Oh, this is also for our historian. How much scouting was in the other camps?
There were Boy Scout troops in every single camp and in Crystal City, and possibly in Santa Fe. I've seen a photo, but that could be a Japanese Boy Scout troop. The Crystal City Boy Scout troop was actually a Japanese Boy Scout troop. So the leaders had all sort of gone through Boy Scouts in Japan because they had Boy Scouts in Japan before the war. For those of you who know the history of Koyasan Troop 379, they had already had some exchanges and visits to Japan. And so, but in all the other camps, there were Boy Scouts, and I haven't confirmed in all the other camps, but at least in 7, there were Girl Scouts. And in many of the camps, because they were in low population states, often the camp became the largest Boy Scout district because there would be 5 to 7 troops, and there wouldn't, so it was a very large part of camp life for a lot of kids. Mike? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just very quick, for yourself as well, for whoever can recall, what was the official stance from BSA at the time, knowing that so many of their scouts were relocated into these camps?
So BSA and also Girl Scouts of of USA, they both fully supported the formation of troops in the camps. They would send out representatives from national headquarters, and we have like charters. You'll see one charter from a troop in Rower. So these are officially affiliated troops. So, you know, for most of these large organizations during the war, there was no, I mean, besides the Quakers, there's really no large institution that opposed the incarceration of Japanese Americans. It was just probably not even within sort of what they imagined to be possible. But they wanted to support the Boy Scouts, and camp administrators also supported the formation of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts because they were seen as all-American activities, right? So this, like the Yellowstone trip was fully supported. The Amache kids went to Mesa Verde. That was supported by the administration. Arkansas kids went camping on the Mississippi. So there's, there was a lot of support. That was another reason why it was big, because the camp administrators saw it as a fruitful and productive sort of pastime for the kids to keep them American, and you know. So, Mike, you had a. Okay. Nahan and then Mike. Okay.
Thank you, Emily. I just wanted to mention that Bill Shishima made Eagle Scout.
Yes.
How many of you up there are Eagle Scouts? Or of you on stage?
Okay.
Well, I would like to mention for those who are historically minded about the camp, the 3 Supreme Court cases of Minoru Yasui, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Fred Korematsu, all 3 were Boy Scouts. So how do you explain, their defiance against the government? These 3 being Boy Scouts and Gordon Hirabayashi being an Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
Hirabayashi violated the curfew deliberately, and eventually he wound up, this is an interesting part of his story, he wound up in, I think, Idaho or Montana, somewhere in a federal facility, and they wanted to move him down to, I think it was around Tucson, Arizona, and there was no one who could take time to take him down there, so he said, okay, I'll just hitchhike my way down there. And believe it or not, he hitchhiked from that one camp to the other and reported as instructed. This guy, it was a matter of principle. Just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I have a comment and a
It's
question.
a crazy story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on the journey from, I think it was in the Washington area back down into Arizona, as he was hitchhiking, he told me that he would slip on the side of the road, and then I suddenly realized that people might be concerned with a body lying on the edge of the road, so he decided that the best thing to do was crawl down into the ditch so no one could see him, and so that was quite a revelation to me. And in fact, at the very end of his trip, he decided that he would get on the bus and get down to, I think it was Tucson, and there is a recreational park named after him in Arizona where he also spent time in prison for his stand.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think we have one last question.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question. The Boy Scouts is really deeply American and develops values, character, leadership. And I was curious, all of you went through this experience during camp. Could some of you share how this may have shaped your life coming out of camp, where you're facing racism and other areas, going through assimilation, and how that helped you become successful in your lives?
Okay, who couldn't hear? Probably everybody. How did camp change you for after camp?
Or how did being a Boy Scout?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, the question was about how being a Boy Scout in camp shaped your life after camp. So especially since Boy Scout teaches a lot of American ideals and stories, would you say, or kind of? And so, what did that mean for your life after camp, being a Boy Scout in camp?
Well, in my case, I was actually a Boy Scout earlier, and in fact, sort of going into camp and then suddenly being thrust upon being a assistant scoutmaster. Well, I think it was just a follow through all the way through, and I think that it really set my ideas also in working with other people, with other scouts. So I think scouting did play a role in what eventually happened in my life.
You know, I'd like to just look at it this way. In camp, there are some bully gangs, Royal Dukes, the Tiles, I don't know what other names, and I think they're all little Tokyo-based guys. And, you know, I don't know if I could have wound up being as bad as them, but scouting directed me in a way away from that kind of thing. And excuse me for saying this, it made me a better citizen.
Well, I would like to mention, after leaving the camp, the several years right after were the worst years of my life. We really had a terrible time after camp. You know, my father was picked up by the FBI. We lost everything. And those several years after camp was the worst of my life. The Boy Scouts oath and all that never figured into my thinking. You know, it was survival. You know, that was my thought. And I just have to say, you know, those were the worst years of my life, and I just hate to talk about it. And a lot of people also went through, but they'll lie about it, or, you know, they won't even talk about it.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but Seiji and Kenji, if you have any other thoughts or kind of reflections on this, or want to say anything about why scouting is meaningful to you now. I know we wanted to mention this is another time, you know, of kind of a lot of social unrest and just different moments, important moments of history, right? Changing moments, being a scout through a pandemic. Would love to kind of hear why it's important to you two, and maybe you can share that with our scouts here.
So personally, scouting is the importance of scouting to me is more because of the morals that it teaches, and I feel like what's taught to us in scouting is very important for society in general, and like I think it makes society better what they teach us, and that's just what's most important to me personally. Yeah.
That's okay. Can we give them a round of applause for doing this today? I know we could talk forever, and I think some of them, but I want to be honoring folks' time today. And I know that there was a hope that I know Seiji and Kenji and maybe Tom wanted to invite any scouts who are able to come to the stage to do the scout oath together, including all of course, our Mountain Scouts. Yeah, go ahead.
All scouts, please stand, even if you're not going to come join us. So as you've heard, we do say the Scout Oath and the Scout Law, and it is part of our program. So we'd like to close today with every Scout here joining me in the Scout Oath and the Scout Law. Scout sign. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to guide my country, to obey the Scout Law, to help other people at all times, keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. The Scout Law: the Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Thank you.
I'm going to invite you all to stay up on stage so we can take a group photo. But I want to say a thank you to everyone who's here in the audience. And can I get another round of applause for our Boy Scouts of Heart Mountain? What an honor to have them all here today. I hope that you do. We only have a few more minutes of our actually have about an hour for our exhibition to be open, so please go check that out. Please stay and gather, and we hope that you continue to join us. Come back for the exhibition, bring your families. We have a Girl Scout Day coming up as well. We're gonna have a dance, talk about swing music, and maybe a little bit of the social life that they mentioned briefly. And I also wanted to give a thank you to our online audience. I know that we weren't able to get to all questions in person and online, but we're really grateful that you were here today. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time. Thank you.